My name is Mark Fleming-Williams, and I'm an economy analyst here at Stratfor. And today I'm joined by John Minnich, East Asia analyst. Today we're going to talk about figures released yesterday by China, which seem to indicate a drop in electricity demand, manufacturing, and investment. Should we be taking these figures seriously? What do they indicate about the Chinese economy right now?
China's had 30 years of, consistent 10% annual growth without going through some kind of destabilizing crisis or correction. Well, now that correction is arriving, and what we're going to see over the course of the next 6 months, the next 12 months, is the government attempt to manage that crisis. And they're beginning the process, or they're being forced to begin the process of sort of rebooting the economy, trying to figure out what the next foundation of that economy is. And what it really comes down to is that for most of the last 30 years, the economy was based on low-cost exports. The low-cost export boom really came to an end in 2008 with the global financial crisis. Since then, the government has kept the economy on life support through primarily massive credit expansion and investment, state-led investment into infrastructure construction, and particular housing. Well, now that housing vehicle, which sustained employment and economic growth for 6 years, is really running its course. So the government is having to shift towards the next paradigm, the next foundation. That's going to be a very difficult process, but that's what they're beginning.
So what you're saying is that China is about to undertake a big rebalancing of what the economy is going to look like. That sounds like a very difficult thing to undertake.
To get a sense of how significant this transformation that China's economy is about to take really is, just look at the components of China's GDP today. So today, 47% of China's GDP comes from investment, fixed capital formation into infrastructure development. And the majority of that is either directly or indirectly related to housing construction. Compared to that, you have 34% of China's GDP that comes from household consumption, private consumption. That's about half of the United States, much lower than Japan, much lower than most developed countries. So what China's trying to do is reform those figures, trying to take that very low consumption base, boost it very high, trying to take that very high reliance on investment and begin to lower it. The problem is that that's a very long and gradual process. Other countries have done it, but it took them decades. It took them half of a century. China's trying to do it in a very short amount of time. Now, it's not just an economic problem. It's also really a geopolitical problem in the most classic sense, because we're talking about something that's not just shifting components of GDP, but also shifting the way the regional components of China's economy function together. So for most of the last 30 years, we've had an economy that was grounded primarily in exports from coastal provinces. In the last 6 years, the government has made a very strenuous effort to rebalance towards having a more developed, more urbanized interior, because you have a massive interior population, 700 million people, who for a lot of the post-reform era, the last 30 years, weren't really actively involved in the economy. Now what the government is trying to do, and what they've been doing over the last 6 years, is investing into the infrastructure in the interior primarily, that eventually they hope will lay the basis for a more nationally unified, higher value added, and also consumption-driven economy. So they have this goal out there. They know that that's what they're approaching, is a nationally integrated economy, one that's based on consumption. They can see that out there as a distant goal. The question is how they get from where they are now to that, and how they do that without first passing through, a very difficult and potentially very disruptive process. How do you go from an economy that for 30 years has been driven by factor inputs to an economy that's driven by the purchasing power of ordinary Chinese without passing through some kind of destabilizing correction that retools the economy so that it's focused on profits, so that it's focused on efficiency, so that it's focused on reducing waste? And that's going to be, not only a challenge economically, but a challenge for the Chinese government politically, and it gets into issues of security.
Okay. So it sounds like we're entering potentially a difficult period in China. Obviously, the world is looking at China because China has been the engine of the global economy for the last, at least 5 to 10 years. What are the implications for the world of this slowdown or this period of uncertainty which might lie ahead?
I would begin by saying the implications are huge, but they're also very diverse, internally variegated. I think, for example, one thing we've already noted is the beginning of a shift in Chinese overseas investment patterns. So for a lot of the last 30 years, when China's economy was based on these factor inputs, on heavy focus on exports, heavy focus on construction, well, Chinese overseas investments very much reflected the needs of that kind of economy. So lots of investments in large-scale mining projects in Australia or South Africa, various parts of Africa and parts of Latin America. Now what we're beginning to see is Chinese overseas investment evolve to meet the needs of the new economy that the Chinese government is trying to construct. So higher focus on value-added manufacturing, high-tech industries, higher focused on anything like from power grids to telecommunications, things that the government sees as befitting a more advanced middle-income economy that they're approaching. Other implications of China's economic transformation would be the flight of low-end manufacturing from southern Chinese or coastal Chinese cities. That's something that we've already seen begin in Southeast Asia, begin in the Indian Ocean basin, and that's going to really accelerate over the next 5 to 6 years. So it creates risks, but also pretty substantial opportunities for a lot of countries. But of course, this doesn't even answer the question of the impact of a real crisis, a destabilizing crisis in China. It also doesn't even get to the question of how will China's economic transformation affect its global security, global diplomatic role? And those are things that we've explored in written pieces pretty extensively at Stratfor, but these remain effectively open questions.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
For more on this and other topics, please visit stratfor.com.